here and to have the chance to speak the truth, publicly. I hope to say some important things, but things that each of you, I hope, would like to say if you're up here in my place. I feel, and I have felt for some months now, that I am being suffocated with lies. I feel as if I'm being corralled into living a lie. Does anyone else feel like that? Well, I've reached a position some weeks ago that that's it, I'm not taking it anymore, I'm fighting back. I won't participate in the lie any longer. Now, on the 25th of March of this year, under the Emergency Management Act, a state of emergency was declared. 8 months ago, a state of emergency. The reason given for the state of emergency was in these terms: the outbreak of the human disease, COVID-19. No other excuse was given for a state of emergency in our democracy for a period of 8 months. The outbreak of the human disease, COVID-19. Well, let's talk about the human disease, COVID-19 for a moment, shall we? In South Australia, there have been 4 deaths from this disease. Now, if we look at the Commonwealth statistics, we know that 73% of coronavirus deaths have another condition attached to them. Another condition that it's difficult to unravel, but would probably kill the person anyway. So we're entitled to say, it's rational to say, applying that 73% to the figures we have, we've had 1 death. Now, I'm not going to go through the usual platitudes that people seem to have to adopt when talking about this particular illness and say 1 death's too many. Of course it is. I don't send to know for whom the bell tolls. I know it tolls for me. But I don't want any of this phony, sentimental talk about deaths. Let's talk about it. Let's look death in the face. Let's look the COVID virus in the face. So let me say that again. The outbreak of the human disease COVID-19 is the only reason for this state of emergency. The human disease COVID-19 has killed 1 person in South Australia in 8 months. What an insult to our intelligence. What a betrayal of our democracy. We can talk about some other statistics, of course, and no doubt there'll be other people telling you a lot more than I can about these matters, but we've had 700,000 tests for the virus in South Australia, more. These are figures I got last week from the official Australian government website. There have been 700 positive outcomes for those tests. That's 0.1%. 1 in 1,000. Does that assist you in getting this lie into perspective? Again, from the Commonwealth Government statistics, the average age of persons who die from the coronavirus, of course this includes the comorbidity of folk, is 85 years of age. That's higher than the average death rate for Australians in normal circumstances. Nationally, no people under the age of 19 have died from the virus. 10 people between the age of 20 and 50, 10 people between the age of 50 and 60. Nearly all who have contracted this virus have what can only be called rationally and fairly and logically mild symptoms. It is the feeblest pandemic in human history. Now, the only other matter pertaining to the physical characteristics of the virus I'd like to mention, because, as I say, this is the first chance I've had, it may be the first chance many of you have had, for us to exchange this information publicly. Have you heard it on the nightly news on Channel 7? Have you heard that figure of one death? Or are you just bombarded relentlessly with statistics that tell you about an outbreak of one or two people who no doubt recover very rapidly if they suffer any symptoms at all? The other statistic I was going to tell you about was to be found in the Nature magazine, which is an august, authoritative scientific publication, and it tells us that 17% of persons infected with the virus are asymptomatic, show no symptoms. That's not many. And it also tells us that people who are asymptomatic are 4 to 5 times less likely to transmit it. Now put those two facts together, and let me suggest you don't have to be Marie Curie or Alexander Fleming to see the importance of those figures in reducing the potency of the virus. We're entitled to exercise common sense. If we feel well, it's likely we won't have it. If we see someone expressing symptoms of the virus, we'll stay away from them. We won't visit our sick grannies if we don't feel well. This is common sense. Now, you may have noticed on what I refer to as Black Thursday, the 19th of November, when 1 million people were ordered to stay in their homes in this state. On Black Thursday, you may have noticed the ambiguity associated with the press conference of the three amigos relating to whether or not masks would actually be mandatory. It was deliberately left vague and ambiguous, let me tell you. Unlike the Victorian government, which had the power to impose such a ridiculous measure for no purpose, the South Australian government was constrained by the power in the Emergency Services Act. The Police Commissioner, the chief coordinator under this fake emergency, had the power to order us to wear masks, but only if it could be established that it would prevent the transmission of the disease. They knew perfectly well that the imposition of masks wouldn't go any way to preventing the transmission of the disease. So instead of telling us the truth about that, they fudged it. Fudged it to the extent, and I don't know whether this was your experience, it was certainly my experience, a lot of people thought it was mandatory. I had people accosting me at the supermarket, telling me I was breaking the law, how selfish I was and a lawbreaker. And when I tried to explain these circumstances to him, he told me I was delusional. Now, of course, the key reason the government weren't prepared to take that on, apart from the fact that, let me tell you, the legal profession haven't surrendered here. If they tried to impose that mask requirement, there would have been plenty of lawyers up and about with a judicial review application. And be assured that the legal profession has not surrendered to the same extent, I'm sorry to say, as the medical profession has. As far as the political class is concerned, it's been a total surrender. But the misfortune for the government, of course, is that just at about the time of Black Thursday, and I call it Black Thursday, this day of the direction that we must all stay in our home, the tens of thousands of businesses must close. I called it Black Thursday not because people died, which is the usual association with that moniker, but because something just as precious was on its way to dying, and that's our precious liberty. It was indeed Black Thursday. But here's the problem the government had. Just at about the time they wanted to impose the masks, the Danish government released the most effective study and transparent study of the effectiveness of masks that's ever been undertaken. Try and look it up. Get on your computer and do your Google search. You'll have to wade through 5 pages of activist websites, and I include the ABC in that, of course. 5 pages of activist websites trying to falsely undermine this brilliant piece of research and data collection. Read it for yourself. It is methodologically impeccable. The sampling criteria they undertook was world's best practice. 6,000 people participated. Half of them wore masks, half of them didn't. Over a period of 6 months, they were tested. Those who were directed to wear the masks, that half, were frequently and carefully instructed on how to use them, and their use was monitored. 6 months later, the test results were in. Of those who wore the masks, 1.8% were infected or had been infected with the virus. Of those who didn't wear the masks, 2% were infected. Statistically, allowing for the margin of error, there was a nil difference between the two figures. When did you last hear about that on the ABC? When claims as to the effectiveness of masks are made relentlessly on the television stations and in your newspapers, the Adelaide Advertiser in particular, by whom we are not served well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you. When were they last fact-checked on these ridiculous assertions they make about masks, which are made in the teeth, in the face of this world-class study by the Danish government? Can I tell you something about masks? The world I grew up in, the only people who wore masks were rapists, armed robbers, and because in my 20s I spent some time living in Belfast in Northern Ireland, I did see Provo gunmen at the Andersonstown Cemetery in the Falls Road as they fired their rifles above the coffin of a dead terrorist. I saw them wearing masks. Masks separated. They divide us into opposing camps. They're unnatural. I've come to the conclusion that the bureaucracies and the paid activists supporting the bureaucracies promoting them intend them to have this effect. Do I strike you as an incautious or naturally inclined extremist person? Let me assure you I am not. I have come to the conclusion that the bureaucracies that are supporting and buttressing this ridiculous state of emergency intend the masks to have this effect. They want to keep us alarmed, they want to keep us anxious, and they want to keep us in a position where we're easily manipulated. Do you agree with me? And what's more, they are intended to envision us for even more invasive periods. This is obvious to all right-thinking people, surely. So let's now that the facts about the virus have been stated, spoken publicly, truth has been spoken about it, let's have a look at the proportionality of the response in relation to it. As we know, the first state of emergency, as it could only do under the legislation, lasted 14 days. Do you remember that? Flattening the curve? What a farce. What a farce scientifically, legally, morally. It's been extended by 28-day period since on 8 occasions. It is presently due to expire on the 12th of December. We have not experienced anything resembling an emergency in that period of 8 months. It must not be extended. There is no medical, moral, or legal reason to extend it. You know this. The lie must not be extended. Now, can I just, there are other people who are wanting to speak, and I won't be long, but I did want to tell you something that I think is very important about the way this regime under the state of emergency operates. Every single act of this regime in the last 8 months has been authorised not by our elected parliament or by our court, but by a cabal of bureaucrats headed by the police commissioner or state coordinator. He issues edicts. They are not laws. Let no one tell you you are breaking the law if you don't follow his direction. You are disobeying an edict. And for someone who spent a lifetime in the law, respecting the law and its traditions, let me tell you that's a very important distinction. People described as his authorised officers enforce the law. It happens to be the South Australian Police Force whom he uses to do this, but it need not be. That could change. They are technically, and this is the police force when they're acting in this role, his private army. This isn't hyperbole. They are technically his private army. They are not enforcing laws made by the parliament we elect to make our laws. They are enforcing his private edict.
That's why I gave a machine.
I'm not misleading you. The distinction between laws and edicts is, or was, I should say, at the heart of what separated us from China, or from Soviet Russia, or from Mugabe's Zimbabwe. It's the difference between the rule of law and the rule of rulers. Because they are not laws, they can't be tested in our court. Perhaps I can tell you briefly about my experience on Black Thursday, and it was just over here at the corner of Coocher Street. I ventured out. Perhaps I'd taken a lot more trouble to read the terms of the direction than other people might have had the opportunity to do. The Law Society told solicitors to stay home. They were wrong. If you read it properly, solicitors could still come to attend to their clients' needs. I had a conference with a solicitor. I walked from my home at North Adelaide into town. We're a ghost town. I completed my business there and I was on my way to the bank. Did you know you could go to the bank? Not a lot of people knew that. And I was walking down Coocher Street to the bank when a squad car pulled up. 3 masked persons with guns who were police officers but weren't going about the business of being police officers on that day. They were enforcing edicts under a regulation, under an emergency regulation issued by one man. Pulled me over. And the first thing they did was they told me a lie. They told me the lie that it was against the law for me not to be wearing a mask. It was a very disenchanting experience for a former judicial officer, for a man in the garb of the South Australian Police, and there are police over here, I hope they're listening. For a man in the garb of the South Australian Police Force, clothed with their authority, authorised and carrying arms to tell me a lie. He knew it was a lie because when I challenged him, he backed off. He tried it on. He tried it on just like our chief medical officer tried it on at that press conference. Now, they did try to tell me that it was also against the law for me to go to my bank. I accept they were mistaken about that. Kathy mentioned this farce that ensued in relation to the pizza restaurant at Woodville. Can I just say something about that? We're actually lucky that the sheer incompetence of those 3 amigos was on display in this, or Black Thursday might still be with us. We might have still be experiencing it. And you'll remember how it happened. The chief medical officer inferred that because someone had apparently contracted the virus from this pizza restaurant without, like the other persons who had tested positive, they're having contracted it in situ. But had contracted it from ordering a pizza. And she took it upon herself. They to infer from that there was some new strain of the coronavirus, transmitted in the anchovies perhaps. Novel coronavirus 19.1. Thank you for laughing. I was searching for laugh there, but now let me get very serious, because what did she do on the strength of this ridiculous inference she drew? She ordered 1 million people to stay in their homes. She closed tens of thousands of businesses down on the basis of this stupid inference, made worse by the circumstance that the whole matter could have been cleared up very quickly if one of her Department of Health officers had done what a probationary police constable would have done in his first week on the force, and gone down to the owners of the restaurant and shown them a photograph of this Spanish gentleman who's copping all the criticism from the Premier, and say, have you seen this man before? And they say, yes, he works out the back. You don't have to be Hercule Poirot to work that out. I'm going to say it again because I love this experience of telling the truth. On the strength of this ridiculous woman sent 1 million of people in our state to their homes and locked them in. Do you understand how preposterous this current regime is? Now, I have to say that in relation to our Chief Medical Officer, that I've heard medical receptionists at small suburban medical practices speak with more authority about medical matters than her. And I assure you I'm not being disrespectful to medical receptionists. I am being disrespectful to her, deliberately. This is personal. And I'll give you an example of why it's personal, because do you recall what happened when this farce was uncovered on the Friday? They withdrew the particular direction that obliged people to stay at home, but they adjourned it for 36 hours before it took any operation. On that Saturday, do you not think that tradesmen or hairdressers or shopkeepers would have been happy to have taken that opportunity to make up for the money that was lost when she diagnosed this non-existing variant of the coronavirus? If you had any humanity, if you had any fellow feeling, or in the case of the Premier, if you had any cojones, you would have brought that particular declaration to an end straight away. These people are spiteful. They are indifferent to the consequences of their grievous fates. Now, of course, our Premier contented himself in this situation with saying that he was fuming. Remember that? Not fuming at the Chief Medical Officer where responsibility lay, or at the Department of Health investigators who hadn't carried out a proper investigation. He was fuming at this anonymous Spaniard gentleman, carrying on like some drag queen in some fifth-rate farce. Seeing he wanted to blame a Spaniard, let me tell you, the Spanish have a lovely word for people like him. And if there are any Spanish people here, I hope they'll excuse my pronunciation. It's pioso. He's pioso. He's a clown. There's no pretense of proportionality now. In the circumstances of their conduct on Black Thursday having been exposed, you know what's happened? They've rolled out the COVID app. And we all know why. This is happening all over the West. As Cathy said, in Britain, the government has announced that Access, the National Health Service, is contingent on getting confirmation on your electric passport of having taken the vaccine that's supposed to be arriving. That's happening in Britain. Alan Joyce. I up one morning and turned the radio on, and there was Alan Joyce saying to me, "No jab, no flight." And I thought, goodness me, he's finally made compulsory what's his favourite activity. But no, that wasn't the case. He was talking about a vaccine. And I'm sorry if you think I'm indulging in some ad hominem or personal insults. I am. Do you see the limitless arrogance and impertinence of these people who think they can treat us like this? Bear in mind that Alan Joyce was the man who personally was responsible for driving Israel Folau out of the Australian rugby team for expressing his personal religious views on Facebook. These people are revealing themselves for what they are. Now, someone who knew a lot about tyranny was one of my favourite writers, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He won the Nobel Prize in 1970. He won it for a book called The Gulag Archipelago. You may be familiar with it. It was about his experiences in Stalin's prison camps in the 1950s. In that book, he tells us frequently how political prisoners, after a day's slave labour, come back to their dormitories and they return to one topic of conversation. And that topic was, why is it that we never took a stand against the tyranny when we had the chance to do so? When there were more of us than there were of them. When the people hadn't been totally dispirited. Promise yourself today, when you're at this rally, as you leave the rally, that you will never allow yourself to be in the position to have to say that. The totalitarianism we're experiencing is only incipient, but it is real and it intrudes further and further into our lives on a daily basis. You know it. These times require us to challenge and ridicule and oppose anyone peddling fear and panic, but they also require us to cease to comply with the lies. Never wear a mask. Never register electronically. And remember, for people who refuse to live the lie, there are no loopholes. If you belong to a church, go to your minister or priest or pastor and beseech them by the bowels of Christ to open their church immediately for full and unrestricted worship. Let me end on this. Solzhenitsyn said, "Let us make a choice whether to remain consciously a servant of falsehood or shrug off the lies and become an honest man worthy of the respect of his own children." Thank you for listening.